Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. So, in recent times, we've heard a lot of Zionism, especially on the right in America. We hear a lot about standing with Israel, standing with the Jews. But is the Jewish people and Israel and Zionism synonymous? Today, I have here with me Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss, and we're going to be talking about that exact subject. Welcome back to Zack Riordan Unfiltered. All right, so Rabbi Weiss, tell us just a little bit about where you come from, where you grew up. Just tell us a little bit about you, your background.
So first, with the help of the Almighty, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message and so sanctify His name and bring peace to the world. Amen. My name, as you mentioned, is Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss. I was born and bred in the U.S., actually in Brooklyn, New York. My parents, of blessed memory, my father and mother were both Hungarian. My mother's parents and so came from Poland. My father is generations Hungarian. They married here in the States, but my father actually, his parents were killed in Auschwitz when the Nazis came. He escaped when the Nazis entered Hungary, went to Italy. From Italy, ended up in the United States, and there my parents married. The vast majority of my family from both sides were murdered by the Nazis, both in Poland and in Hungary, from both sides of the family. They both were very religious, and I was brought up in a very religious community that was anti-Zionist community in New York, and married to my wife. Should have long and healthy years. Her father was actually in Auschwitz. He passed on also already, and also we lived in Brooklyn for many years. In Brooklyn, right across from Manhattan, it's called Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's the largest concentration of religious Jews. It's right across from Manhattan. Anybody who goes to New York are invited to come and cross the Williamsburg Bridge, and you go right from Manhattan into this very large Jewish enclave. You won't find one Israeli flag there, not one single Israeli flag, because it's a very religious community, and therefore they are anti-Zionist. So I grew up in such a community. I moved to Williamsburg from another part of Brooklyn where I was born, and once I got married, because my custom to move to the area of the wife when you marry, and there the chief rabbi of Palestine, his name was Rabbi Yisroel Teitelbaum of blessed memory. He was like 30 odd years. He was the chief rabbi of Palestine from the 1950s, and he moved out of the state of Israel. He refused to give it any credence, any recognition, and he held the position of chief rabbi of Palestine while he lived in New York, and he was very, very vocal and very strong in his opposition to the existence of the state of Israel, and that it is a bogus Judaism, and so large, almost the vast majority of the community of Williamsburg are very strong adherents to this Rabbi Teitelbaum. He's not living anymore; he passed away in the 70s, and basically the spirit of this, anti-Zionism is alive and well, and the very religious communities from the streets of Jerusalem to the communities throughout Europe. If you go to Antwerp, Belgium, you go to London, or other parts of the world, Argentina, Canada, wherever there's a very religious communities, they will be invariably anti-Zionist. And so that's how I grew up. And being that I was more or less, I moved into the community in Williamsburg, I became much more vocal as a spokesperson, thank God, to explain to the world, to clarify this confusion that people confuse and integrate Judaism with Zionism and to serve God, this Jewish religion. They confuse with the support of the state of Israel, while it's entirely diametrically opposite and it's really contradictory. So that is what I'm all about. That basically, with God's help, I've focused my life work on that, and that's what, with God's help, I'll try to explain, because it's to the world. It's very confusing, and it seems puzzling that you will find very religious Jews that oppose this, so to seem, very Jewish state. And that, with God's help, I'll try to explain.
Absolutely. And so, just a little bit of background. This isn't going to be a religious discussion, but most of my viewers are going to be in the Christian sect. And a lot of times in the Christian sect, they confuse standing with the Jews with standing with Zionism, and what they're actually standing for is Zionism and not Judaism and not the Jewish people. So there is a difference there. Can you speak a little bit to how many communities, observant communities, there are that are anti-Zionist?
Yes. So as I said, being that in its core, the essence of Judaism is totally contradictory and anathema to the concept of Zionism. It's contradictory. You will find, therefore, the fact that on the ground, when you will go to the very religious community, wherever the country it may be, it will automatically be anti-Zionist. So I can't give you the numbers, and statistically we are much smaller than the Zionist communities. The majority of Jews around the world, for instance, don't keep the Ten Commandments. They don't keep the Sabbath. They don't keep kosher. That doesn't mean that they can be representative of the religion, when in the Torah it says that you must respect and uphold the laws of the Sabbath. You're not allowed to eat a pig. You're not allowed to. It's kosher. It's the laws that are there. And yet you'll find something people call it Reform Judaism, and they're the majority of Jews in the United States. The vast majority, I think, are non-religious. So it means nothing. So I can't. In numbers, we are smaller than the, and unfortunately, but at the same time, this is the religion that we've been adhering to, and that has, thank God, existed. And we have a promise from God that it will not disappear. It will be till the end of time, from the beginning of 3,000 years ago, when we made the covenant to uphold the religion. So there's the religion Judaism, and then there's the ersatz Judaism that's called Reform Judaism, or later we have Zionism or such, the nationalist concept of what they call Judaism, but that's all bogus Judaism. So in numbers we are smaller, but again, I think it's really necessary to understand what the differences are, so that the people should be able to grasp what we're talking about. If you allow me, I'll explain.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Judaism is a covenant that there was God created the world, Adam and Eve. 10 generations afterwards, there was this big flood. There was Noah, and that remained, and his family were all descendants. Every human being is descendants of Noah. And 10 generations later, he had an offspring that was Abraham. Abraham had a son Isaac, and Isaac had a son Jacob. There was, and of course, everybody knows of Ishmael. So basically, the Jewish lineage is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob had 12 tribes, and we are all descendants of those 12 tribes. God sent Jacob and his descendants, the 12 tribes, down to Egypt, where they were enslaved for 210 years. We were supposed to be 400 years, but God lessened it to 210 years because of the severe oppression of the Jews that were there. And after 210 years, God took us out of Egypt. He took us out of Egypt and took us into the wilderness of the Sinai, and there on Mount Sinai, God gave the Jews the Torah. And so when the gathering of was probably over 1 million people, because the Torah states 600,000 males from the age of 20 to 60, and their families. So there's the older and the younger and the women folk. So it must be over 1 million people easily. They all stood there and saw how God spoke to them. And Moses went up on Mount Sinai, went up to the to the sky and for 40 days and 40 nights, came back with the Torah, and all in the presence and witnessed by this over 1 million people, and how God actually spoke to the Jewish people and said, I am your God, gave us the 10 commandments, and Moses brought down the Torah. That's the 5 books of Moses. So, and we made a covenant. All the Jewish people stated, Naaseh v'nishma, that we are accepting this covenant to be subservient to God and to uphold the laws of the Torah, which is 613 commandments. It's a lot. There's the famous 10 commandments. One of them is the Sabbath, as I mentioned, not to do work on the Sabbath. Basically, this was given to Moses, and this covenant is exactly the same covenant that Moses accepted 3,000 years ago, over 3,000 years ago. Today, we must uphold, adhere to it, not add or not subtract from it in any manner, shape, or form. That is what Judaism is altogether. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a subservience to God, accepting this covenant. It's not a nationalism. Yes, if somebody is born from a Jewish mother, it goes with the lineage goes from the mother, then he is obligated to uphold the Torah, even if his parents dropped, God forbid, didn't practice the religion. But if his mother's Jewish, he is required to keep all these laws. Now, I say 613 commandments, but not all of the 613 pertain to everybody. There's certain laws that pertain if somebody's living in the Holy Land. There's certain laws that pertain to a man, others, specifically to men, and some to women. There's many, many laws. But for instance, giving certain a tenth of charity and so forth that's required from the land on fruits and vegetables that grow, that is in the Holy Land. That's not required that you have to give a tenth of the land what grows if you're living in the diaspora outside. So I'm just giving an example of that. Mm-hmm. Basically, this is what we upheld this. Now the world changes. Different is technology came around. For instance, light. The concept of electric. Now, so electric, when they discovered electric, so now the question was, am I allowed to on the Sabbath use electric? We're not allowed to make a fire on the Sabbath. The concept is because God created the world 6 days, and the seventh he rested, so we are, as a Jewish person, required to show our belief that the God created the world. So we're not allowed, it says in the Torah very clearly, we're not allowed to make fire on the Sabbath. So every religious Jewish person will never make fire. Now, when it comes to going in a car with this combustible or turning on a light, all these. So now when this came, so the rabbis discussed amongst themselves, is this considered fire? And they decided that we're not allowed to open a light switch, we're not allowed to drive in a car. There's also on the Sabbath, because this goes into the rule of not making fire on Sabbath. So a religious Jew won't go in a car, he will not open lights, he will not use electric, he won't use a telephone, he won't use anything that's requiring electric. That doesn't mean we won't use. In other words, on the Sabbath, we will prepare the flames, the stove that we would put on light the oven, the gas, or the top, and then we put pots on it before the Sabbath, that the food should be hot on the Sabbath. But so we do eat hot and things, but we are forbidden to open that on the Sabbath. So that's basically a religious Jew. Now, around 300 years ago, a group started called Reform Judaism. That was started by a scholar, but unfortunately a evil scholar. He came along and he said, well, you don't have to, he's going to make a new style of Judaism that he's going to pick and choose what's convenient, and you don't have to adhere to the laws of the Torah. Moses, a lot of it was blasphemy. He said Moses made the Torah by himself. He didn't get it from God. And therefore we're not required to uphold all these laws. We're going to do what's convenient. And that's why they're going to reform Judaism. Now, that, of course, to somebody who believes that God gave us the Torah, it's from God, you can't reform God's word. It's ridiculous. So really, Reform Judaism is just using a ridiculous name. It should be called Buddhism. I don't know, whatever you want, right. But it's not Judaism. But right. But this is the works of the Satan. They decided to call themselves Judaism, and in order to give them legitimacy in what they're doing, they gathered together and they created a rabbinate that they're going to ordain their ministers or rabbis, what they like to say. So in other words, they tried to give themselves a facade of legitimacy that it's Jewish, and they call themselves a branch of Judaism. basically, that is, to understand Zionism, I'm explaining what reform is, just to show that something that is so anti the Jewish religion, so contradictory to Jewish religion, that they can eat pork, they can not uphold the Sabbath. Everything is discarded, only what's convenient. And yet they say they're Jewish, and they consider themselves a legitimate form of Judaism. And if you say that they're not, they get insulted and they say you're racist or whatever it may be. But this is the fact. When this started around 250 years ago, the rabbis in Europe, because it started in Europe, in Austria and Germany, so the rabbis around who were the leaders of the community, because Judaism is a religion, so the leaders of all the communities in Europe, 200 of the greatest leaders got together and they issued a decree that we are to be totally estranged and cut off from Reform Judaism. So we were forbidden to go into their temples, into their synagogues, and that is this. And we the community is totally separated, and it was called Orthodox community. A time later, another group started called conservative. So if you're living in the U.S., I'm sure you maybe have heard of this, conservative and Reform and Orthodox. So conservative decided that the Reform went off the deep end, so they're going to be a little more conservative. They're not going to discard altogether all the Jewish laws. But we, again, we laugh at that, because there's one God. He's the ruler of the world. He gave us a document, a contract, and you can't mess with it. You can't play games with it. So you can't. It's exacting. It says clearly in the Torah. You can't add or subtract from the laws of the Torah. So the concept of not being Orthodox is unacceptable, and it's not Judaism. It's just something else. So Orthodox is the way what's considered by us the legitimate Judaism. Now, 100 years after this movement started, so we're up to like 150 years ago or so, a group decided that this reform, the concept of reform was that you don't have to keep the Torah, so you don't have to dress like a Jew. They cut off their beards and payas. They started dressing like their neighbors, and they tried to assimilate. They should be accepted in society. One of the reasons they claimed that they are dropping all these things is because they feel they're being attacked, they're being discriminated against, and the Jews suffered a lot in Europe. They weren't allowed to buy land, and they had many lands. They had many decrees against Jews, and there was anti-Semitism. So they said our solution is assimilation. That was reform. The Zionists came along around 150 years ago, and they said, well, this is not working for us, because there was a lot of anti-Semitism still going on, blatant anti-Semitism. They said, we have another idea. We're going to make a national home. We're going to we'll gather together and create a national home. And we'll take guns, and we'll protect ourselves. We'll be a proud nation amongst nations. And that will be the solution to anti-Semitism and so on. It's all the wiles and of Zionism, of the Satan, we believe, because you can't go away from God. We have a covenant. And also, it's only excuses for not upholding the Torah. When the Zionist movement came along, so then, again, the great rabbis, and I have a book called 100, it's clear on this page, the rabbis speak out 130 years of rabbinical opposition, of religious Jewish opposition to Zionism. So here you have a compilation of the major rabbis from all the different countries, whether it's Russia, Lithuania, United States, London, Palestine, Morocco, Tunisia, Yemen, all the greatest rabbis. I mean, there's tens of thousands of rabbis, but the ones who were the leaders of the communities, how in each their style spoke up against Zionism and said that this is totally unacceptable, as I will explain. But first of all, so this movement started like Zionism around 140, 150 years ago. Our covenant is 3,000 years. We've been dispersed amongst the nations for 2,000 years already. We have the same religion, the same that Moses stood on the Torah and got the Torah from God on Mount Sinai. We are keeping that same Sabbath. It's called Shabbos by us. We are keeping the same kosher. We have the same language. All is the same. But Zionism, first Reform and then Zionism comes, and they're trying to totally gut the Judaism got the godliness of it, the spirituality, and creating a nationalist concept. Reform was that it should be like some type of tradition, and they'll call it Judaism. Zionism is gutting the Judaism and making it into a nationalism, that we should have a proud people with a land, with a military, with a Nobel Prize winners, an Olympic team, and all the strappings of a nation. But you don't have to be religious either. They're very proud to say they're a democracy. The one democracy in the Middle East, they keep on saying, So they're totally announcing that Judaism does not mean adherence to the Torah. And that's exactly what they are. They're not adhering to the Torah. But basically, why is Zionism so contradictory to Judaism? As God's help, I'll explain. Because, as I say, we have adherence to the Torah. That's the A to Z of what Judaism is. Zionism, when they came, these leaders of this movement, they wanted a nationalist home. They almost entirely, I'll show you a picture, Theodor Herzl created this, his name, and then here you see a picture, it's David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister in 1948 when they created the state, and you see this historical moment of the Declaration of Independence in 1948 in Independence Hall, a picture of Theodor Herzl on top, Stars of David, because that's the symbol. And here you see sitting at the dais, almost none of them are covering their heads. A religious Jew, 24 hours, he has to wear a yarmulke. Means it's an acronym. It means Yoreh Malka, Yoreh fear, Malka the king. A Jew has to show that he remembers there's a God above us. It's a requirement in our law books. And here they're making a historical moment where they're declaring the state of Israel. And instead of having rabbis or religious Jews, you can see exactly what they are. They are a nationalist endeavor, and they're sitting there. That's the hubris, the chutzpah, we say, of them when they're openly sitting there to the world, saying this is our state, a Jewish state, and they're totally rebelling against the words of God. And they were very clear on what they wanted. They didn't want some type of godly religious adherence to the word that returned. No, they wanted a national home. In fact, their ambition first was they were going to go to Uganda, the Patagonia next to Argentina, because they were looking for a lush land that they should be successful in creating a national home. But they understood, they had a meeting in 1890s in Basel, Switzerland, where they decided that you need massive backing in order to create a homeland. In order to create a nation, you need a lot of support from the world. So they'll go to Palestine, and they'll use the Star of David, and they'll say, hey, God gave us this land when he took us out of Egypt, so it's ours. We have the deed to the land of the Bible. It's all ours. And anybody who tries to impede our endeavor, they're simply haters of Jews, and they have no right to the land. So they totally disqualify the rights of the Palestinians to the land because they turn to the Bible and say it's God's world. God gave us the land, and everybody who's there is interlopers. They have no right to be there. So they use Judaism, but it's falsely using Judaism. Why? Because God does not state that we have a right to have this piece of land. And let me explain that to you with God's help. Because God took us out of Egypt, took us into the land then. And it told Moses that we should be, the Jewish people should go up to the Holy Land. Anybody who didn't, who accepted not to worship idols had the right to be there. And when we went there in the Torah, it says many times in the 5 books of Moses, it says that God warns the Jews that you have to be on this high level of spirituality to remain in the land. If not, the land will reject us like an eye if you put in a piece of sand. It blinks, it cannot accept the foreign. The land is holy, it's a holy land, we call it. And that if we will not be up to the required spirituality, then the land will reject us, and we were thrown out of the land. As many of the prophets, all in English or in any other language, in Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all the prophets warned the Jews that they're going to be driven from the land because we're not that they were such terrible sinners, but they weren't on that level of spirituality required to remain. So 2,000 years ago, we were driven from the land by first the Romans and then the Greeks. They destroyed the temples. King Solomon built the temple, and it was destroyed, and the second temple was destroyed, and we were driven and spread out amongst Europe and in Iraq and through all the many different lands, in Yemen and all the different lands. So this was not because we were lacking in military power. It was because God declared on us and he warned us through the prophets that we will be dispersed. And that happened with the destruction of the temple. So, in fact, King Solomon, who built the temple, wrote a book of prophecy called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. He wrote there clearly, there will come a time when we will be dispersed amongst the nations. We are under strict oath of God, 3 oaths. Once we're dispersed, once we're sent out into exile, 1, we should not return en masse. We should not take upon ourselves to return in large numbers to the Holy Land, because it's a godly decreed exile. Secondly, do not rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. A Iranian citizen, American citizen, a Canadian citizen, English citizen, wherever you are, you have to pray for the well-being of that nation. You have to be a loyal citizen in that country. Even if they mistreat the Jews, even if they tax them unreasonably and unfairly, it doesn't matter. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. That's a decree of exile. So we uphold this for 2,000 years already. So there's 3 oaths. 1, not to return en masse, not to rebel against any nation, and thirdly, not to make any attempt to end exile. And for 2,000 years, since the destruction of the temple, 2,000 years ago, we have been wandering and been amongst many of the countries around the world, or all the countries around the world, and we were always warned by our leaders, the rabbis, and that have patience, don't attempt to reestablish any Jewish, and because that would be a rebellion against God. We do believe that one day the Almighty, with his compassion, God is all compassionate, he will end exile. So we do, as religious Jews, believe there will be a time where there will be a metaphysical change in the world. In other words, God will make a miracle. There won't be any more atheists. Everybody will be living together in peace and serving God. At that time, God will bring us back, and it won't be the state of Israel. The state of Israel is a sin, rebellion against God, but it will be all humanity recognizing one God. God himself will build the temple. The Palestinians and the Muslims, all people around the world, everybody will believe that there's one God. Everybody will serve God in harmony. That's what we believe. So Jews have this yearning to return, but we know to take any steps, to take arms into our hands or try to return, that's considered a very cardinal crime. It's considered like you're rebelling against the will of the Almighty. Not like, you are rebelling against. And therefore, for 2,000 years, even though we went through the Inquisition and the Crusades, and so many times that Jews were expelled from Portugal and Spain and so forth, we still in all, we never went and reestablished any semblance of a Jewish state any part of the world, and certainly not in Palestine, because we're under oath by God not to do that, and it wouldn't accomplish anything, because God sent us into exile as like a medicine. Sometimes you're told to take a medicine or give your child medicine, and it's very bitter, and the child cries when you give it to him. But he has to take it, because that is what that will make him healthy. We believe that this exile that we have been for 2,000 years, it's a medicine from God to break our haughtiness. When the time comes, when the time is right, it will, in the blink of an eye, God will end exile and everybody will return. Till that day comes, as I say, we are patiently living in every country of the world as loyal citizens, and in fact we have to show gratitude to the lands for taking us. So in the issue of Palestine was under control of the Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years now, for instance. And when Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal and so forth, the Muslim countries actually embraced the Jews and gave them a home. So even though we have a distinctly different religion, it was never an impediment, the difference of religion, was never an impediment between coexistence, because the Muslims understood, they were learned people, they had read the Jewish texts, and they knew that we're not aspiring to take the land away from them, that we'll be good citizens, and we were. We flourished. We put out our greatest rabbis. For hundreds of years, we lived in Muslim lands. We put out Maimonides, great rabbis, and many, many other great rabbis. Our communities flourished as religious Jewish communities in Iraq, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Morocco, and on and on. We lived in all these countries together with the Muslims, and in Palestine. Palestine was under Muslim leadership, and Jews and Muslims, till the advent of Zionism, lived together. We never had in the same courtyards, we babysat each other's children. Why? Because this whole issue of this conflict today, what Zionism is creating, this havoc, this conflict, has absolutely nothing to do with a religious issue. Religion, again, never stood in the way of coexistence. So we were living, and we have many people who are still, thank God, in their 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They'll talk about how they were living in this old city of Jerusalem together and babysitting each other's children. The Muslims, I go to many Muslim communities, they all talk about, and they tell what their parents and grandparents told stories of coexistence. Zionism was a movement that started, as I say, a movement in Europe that was a breakaway mostly from the Reform Jews. So they were grandchildren from people who were non-observant, who didn't keep the Torah. And they just were not happy with this in assimilation, with this trying to conform in Europe to their communities, and they were not accepted. So they said they're going to come along and they're going to make their nation state in Palestine because of convenience. Now, by doing that, of course, first of all, it's a rebellion against God that we're not allowed to return en masse. Secondly, being that the land of Palestine was inhabited mostly by Muslims, the largest community were Muslims, the second largest community were Christians, the third was a Jewish community. All of these communities were in total opposition to the creation of the state of Israel. Why were they in opposition? Obviously, the Muslims didn't want their homes away, not because they were against Jews. They didn't want their homes taken away. The Christians also had the same issue. And the Jews, because they were also looked at these Zionists as the greatest danger, because they're trying to destroy what Judaism is, the religion. They're trying to remove, to gut Judaism, the essence of Judaism being spiritually, attached to God. So these communities all stood in opposition, and yet the Zionists came along and they had the backing of Britain. They Balfour Declaration, if you heard, because the leaders lived in Britain and so forth, and in Europe, and they were able to get this backing, a support from the European leaders that they should be able to create their so-called Jewish state. So let me repeat, just very short. In essence, Judaism is to serve God. It's a covenant to be subservient to God, and we are not a nationalist state. Secondly, in its fruition, creating the state, Zionism, which is a national state that totally has nothing with the concept of subservience to God, it's the contradiction to that. But in creating their state, they breach the oaths of exile that God foresaw when his prophecy, he told through King Solomon, that we're not allowed to return en masse. They insist. They keep on saying, come up, make aliyah, come up. They try to encourage and bring people up there in large numbers. They breach that oath. They breach the oath of not to rebel against nations. They're busy fighting all the nations over there, the Palestinians and all the other people around there. And thirdly, they keep on saying that the beginning of redemption, they're using the Judaism supposedly for to explain that it's legitimate by saying, oh, with the God's redemption, God is taking us back to the Holy Land. So in every shape and form, they are breaching all the laws of the Torah. It is totally anathema. It is antithetical to Judaism, contradictory, unacceptable. Just one more thing, the cherry on the cake is because Jews are required by the Torah to show gratitude, to show thankfulness. It's a requirement. Part of the godliness, to be subservient to God, is to always appreciate good that is done to you. The Muslim countries embraced us. They gave us a home. When we were being murdered by the Inquisition and the Crusades, the Muslims took us in, and we were throughout generations, and we lived and flourished there. So we have to show gratitude for that. To go and to take the people of Palestine and say, you are evil, you hate Jews, you're anti-Semitic, that's why you don't want us, and to repay their kindness with this evil, with this terrible crime. This is, again, in total breach of what it means to be a Jew, of Judaism. So in every facet we stood, and the rabbis fought it tooth and nails. As the rabbis speak out, they put their opposition to it. And even when it almost came to fruition, when the United Nations was going to ratify the creation of the State of Israel, the chief rabbi of our community that was living in Palestine, Rabbi Sonnenfeld, first was Rabbi Sonnenfeld. He met in the 1920s with the king of Faisal and King Abdullah from Transjordan, and he wrote in Arabic letters stating that we don't want the state of Israel, we are total in opposition. When it came 1948 and the United Nations ratified, so a year before they sent a delegation to Jerusalem, and the chief, he had passed on, Rabbi Sonnenfeld. Rabbi Dushinsky was the next chief rabbi here of the Jewish community. He stated, and it's in the United Nations records, he said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This is not a marginally religious. He's the head of the religious community that was living there. There were two. There was ones from leading the Sephardic communities. And both of these all said this. And it's in the United Nations, Declaration before the United Nations, July 16, 1947. So this is the view of the religious communities. There was Rabbi Ben Zion Chazan. He's from the Sephardic communities and their chief rabbis. Where this is in 1948, he went out with a white flag to give over the city of Old Jerusalem to this is the Jordanian soldiers, the Jordanian army, saying that we refuse to stand together with the Zionists, and they shot him, and he had a bullet in his no signal.
No, it's a problem with me.
Is it okay? Or you hear me still?
Yeah, let me see here. I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you hear me, but you don't see me?
No, I can see you. My camera failed, so you're fine.
That's not a problem. Okay, I believe you're there.
Yeah, you continue, and I'll just continue on audio.
Right. So basically, the Zionists said to these Jews living in city, stand with us or we'll kill you. He went out with this white flag, and they shot him, and he had a bullet to the day he passed on. He had a bullet in his leg, and they assassinated many rabbis. And since that time, after Rabbi Dushinsky passed on, you see gathering in Jerusalem tens of thousands of Jews, and constantly here is in front of the Washington D.C., in front of the White House, when Netanyahu came to visit President this Obama boy. Constantly, we always have demonstrations in the tens of thousands where they say Israel has no right to rule over any part of the Holy Land. Bibi Netanyahu and the state of Israel doesn't represent world Jewry. And this is our history since the state. It's 77 years. We are constantly demonstrating all throughout. And here you can see that when they demonstrate in Israel, they get brutally beaten. Children, old rabbis, they get assassinated. They get brutally beaten. They get arrested here. And I mean, you see, this is soldiers. We're never militant. We don't carry guns. We don't carry knives. We're simply demonstrating. And it doesn't matter. They get arrested because they refuse to serve. It's mandatory military service, boys and girls in the army. Our boys and girls will never serve in their army, so they get arrested. And so this is, unfortunately, they get sprayed, here you can see, with chemicals in order to discourage demonstrations that makes them sick, and it ruins their clothes, it stinks, you can't use it anymore. They get literally trampled and beaten. So that is what we have, the history that the Jewish communities that are true to Judaism around the world, and people don't know this, they think that the more the religious you are, most probably the more you support the state of Israel. But it is totally, totally the opposite. The more the religious community, if they're somebody who's truly connected with the religion, they are anti not only the killing in Gaza that we are witnessing, this carnage in Gaza, but the 77 years of occupation is by us a rebellion against God for every reason because we're not allowed to have a state, because we're not allowed to kill and steal, because we have to, on the contrary, just repay with love and good to the people of Palestine who've given us a home throughout the years. So it's all terrible. It's all the Nakba, what the Arabs call Nakba, the catastrophe. By us, it is a terrible, terrible catastrophe for Jewish people. And I'm simply voicing this, that the view, the ideology of basic Judaism around the world. Zionism always try to ridicule us and marginalize us, and you just try to disqualify that it's just some, small groups. But as I say, anybody can, for themselves, find the facts on the ground that wherever there is a very religious community, they are hurting, suffering, feeling the suffering of the people of Gaza and of Palestine. We are crying with them, and we are praying to God every day for the total removal, the end of the occupation of the state of Israel, that we can have a free Palestine and live together in peace.
Right. Amazing. Amazing. So just to be clear, from my view and my viewers, mostly very Christian, there is and I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, this idea of Christian Zionism, this
Yes.
idea that the Christians must support the Zionist state of Israel because the state of Israel is synonymous with the Jews. And by what you just said, and also by some personal research study that I've done myself, that Zionism was actually started by non-religious Jews and non-religious people. It was not a religious movement that brought about the state of Israel. Is that correct?
That's exactly as I showed that picture. I mean, again, one could prove to themselves. You don't have to believe us. Look it for yourselves. You will find. Again, these are the heads of Zionism, Theodor Herzl. These are all against religion, and openly they were, opposed to religion. They openly desecrate the Sabbath. You go to Israel. Before the state of Israel was, the Jewish communities, again, ask old people, they'll tell you. You had the communities that were living there in Jerusalem, in Haifa, wherever they were, and they were God-fearing, because throughout history, Jews never went there. As I said, we didn't return en masse, and we were allowed, according to God, to live as individuals. So usually it would be an old rabbi would take some of his students after retired, and they would move there to live off the life and spirituality. So through the hundreds of years, it became the most elite Jewish community of God-fearing Jews, and there was no such a thing as desecration of the Sabbath, because this was a holy community. So in fact, Friday afternoon, our Sabbath starts from Friday night. The Jewish day goes the night and then the day. That's how it works. So from the sundown Friday till Saturday evening, we're not allowed to do work. So they would blow a horn Friday afternoon in the streets of Jerusalem, and the rabbis would certain rabbis would go and make sure that all the stores would be closed. You didn't see a car or anything. Nothing would be or a horse and wagon or anything going on the streets. Everything became quiet. All the stores were closed. Everybody observed and upheld the holy Sabbath, and there was those, and people dressed modestly according to the Jewish law. And it was a religious, God-fearing community. So Zionism is clearly they totally disregard and just simply legitimize the non-observance of the Torah. So they have the audacity to come to the Holy Land that is by us considered like God's garden, and they tell people that it's free. You can do. They sell pig, which is forbidden for us to eat. The cars go. They don't keep the religion in any shape or form. Yes, there are people who keep the religion. First of all, these people who keep the religion, by the way, also get terribly harassed, and I'll explain that to you. But they clearly declare openly and proudly that, as I mentioned at the beginning, that they're a democracy. You don't have to keep the laws. How dare they say that a Jew, that our covenant that we made for 3,000 years, that we died for, and that we proudly teach our children, that if somebody tries to force you not to keep the Torah, you should rather die, let yourself be killed, then not keep the laws of the laws of the Torah. And here they stand and clearly declare that it's a free country. You can do what you want. So it's clearly against God. The only reason they made the state of Israel in Palestine is because they wanted to glean the support of the Christians and that the masses who don't know the laws of the Torah amongst Jews, that they'll be able to say, hey, this is what God gave us, counting on the lack of knowledge of the world, that the world doesn't know that how God clearly told the Jews that we are forbidden to reestablish any type of Jewish sovereignty. So it's totally forbidden according to the Jewish law. So the Christians that are the evangelistic Christians and so on that are supporting Israel, they are inadvertently maybe, but they are supporting the ones who are rebelling against the Jewish religion. I don't know if they would want to do that, but that's what they are doing. So it's really a crime for the Jewish people. But not only that, once they were given control of the land, the Zionists do everything to eradicate the religion because it's an impediment to them. So, for instance, they tried to create like a sports center right in the. Everybody knows, for instance, in Jerusalem, right? That's the center, they say, of all the religions. And by us, everybody knows that I believe in most probably in a mosque and in a church, people would expect that a person should not go half naked into that building. They give that respect to it. It's expected, and people do that. Yet they go on the streets of Jerusalem. They want people to go dressed immodestly. In fact, they try to put a swimming pool right in the center by Mea Shearim. That's where the most religious Jewish community is, where we were living for over 100 years and more, the Jewish community, because when the old city became too packed, there was it was not enough place. They moved to Mea Shearim. Mea Shearim means 100 gates. It's in the new section of Jerusalem, and that's where the center of the very religious community is, the anti-Zionist community. And they decided to create a sports center, a sports complex there, and people made demonstrations, and they were beaten and assassinated, and the blood spilled there. But they tried everything. They make autopsies. A Jew believes that there's a sacredness to the body. So even when somebody passes on, you're not allowed to cut up that body. So it's considered sacred. There's a godliness to it. And they do autopsies constantly to be able to study the body and so forth. So when a person dies, we have to immediately send people over to the hospital that they shouldn't take their eyes off that body. The same thing they do, they archaeological digs. Why? Because they want to study the bones. And it's totally forbidden, according to the Jewish law, to dig up these bodies. And I went to Egypt. I went to Iran. I go to any of these countries. They respect the cemeteries, and they give them the greatest respect. In Egypt, for instance, it was very crowded in Cairo, so they made a road called the Ring Road. So that's like to alleviate the traffic. It goes around the city of Cairo, so they should be able to travel without going through the streets. And in order to create this ring road, it cut through a Jewish cemetery it's massive and big. So what did they do? They didn't make big advertisements about this, but they built it on pillars not to disturb the graves. In Israel, they made Kavush 6. They're one of the main highways. And in order to do that, they had to cut through Jewish cemeteries. It's full of Jewish cemeteries there because of thousands of years that Jews lived there. They didn't have no respect. They dug right through. They would decide to make a hotel. They have no problem with digging up cemeteries. We have demonstrations upon demonstrations. Here you can see where Jewish people are sitting in the holes next to the tractors because they're trying to dig up the graves. And what do the Zionists do? They don't, not only that they don't protect them, but they brutally beat the Jews. It's condoned and supported and made by the state of Israel. They brutally beat and smash their heads, assassinate them. You can see we have thousands and thousands of such pictures. They're standing here protecting the graves. And I mean, on and on, we have these pictures of how they're being brutally beaten. Anybody could go to our site, NKUSA, and see. These are constant demonstrations by the graveyards, that the Zionists are busy digging up. How do they do it? It's clearly against the Torah. It's against the Jewish law. but it means absolutely nothing to them. They have no respect for God or the Torah. And yet, nobody in the world even knows about this or speaks about this. This is what's happening daily for 77 years in the Holy Land. Besides what they're doing to the Palestinians in Palestine and in Gaza, this is what we have, 77 years of this horrific desecration of God and of the Torah. Here you can see the pictures of bones that they're showing and they're trying to protect. Here the coffins, the holes in the ground, but this is 77 years of Zionist total trying to break the Jewish communities, eradicate the religion from the Jewish people. So in every aspect, it's so contradictory, and yet the Christian world, ironically, supports Israel. And what did the Zionists do? They made a rabbinate. So we have, just like the Reform, when I mentioned at the beginning, Reform, in order to give them legitimacy, they ordained their ministers and rabbis, and they called themselves a branch of it. What did Zionism do? Instead of respecting all our great leaders, the Eida Chareidis, God-fearing community, the rabbis I showed you before, Rabbi Dushinsky, Rabbi Sonnenfeld, these great rabbis who have the Eida Chareidis, God-fearing community. Here's Rabbi Dushinsky, as I mentioned. It's called Eida Chareidis, God-fearing community, and we have our chief rabbinate over there. What they did, they made their own rabbinate. Now you ask the world, who's the chief rabbis of Palestine, of the Holy Land? And they'll say, oh, the chief rabbis of Israel. But to us, they're a farce, they're bogus. They're counterfeit, they're frauds. They're not a chief rabbis, but they're learned. They can learn, but they're totally evil. And that is what they have. They're rabbinate, and the world accepts that the rabbis. Benjamin Netanyahu goes to the United Nations or to Congress invariably, always. He doesn't wear a yarmulke when he goes around usually, but a lot of times he'll put on a yarmulke there, and he'll stand up there and he'll roll his eyes and say, oh, the land is ours because God gave it to us. Excuse me, what about all the rabbinical authorities who went through the Holocaust, who gave their lives and their whole existence is to uphold the Torah? They all are stating unambiguously and clearly that we are forbidden to create the state of Israel. What you're doing is a rebellion against God. In the Torah it says, God says, why are you rebelling against me? It will not be successful. It says more than that. We are warned that if we attempt to end exile, we attempt to breach the laws of exile, we will be hunted like animals. Many rabbis said Hitler made the Jews into bars of soap, the Nazis, and to lampshades. It was a punishment because of this breach, the creation of this Zionism that started like 50 years prior to Hitler. His name should be eradicated. Yeah, the Nazis will be punished for what they did. But what was the cause? We believe that everything that happens doesn't happen per happenstance. Just if there's a tsunami, if there's a plague, we believe everything is from the hands of God, and we must repent and be introspective and see what brought this about. Many of the rabbis, stated that we were hunted like animals because in the Torah, King Solomon warned us. In his prophecy, he said, if you will attempt to leave exile, you will be hunted like animals. So, there's a lot to talk about there, but unfortunately, the Zionists have two weapons. I call it two nuclear weapons they have. One is they understood in order to be able to get this massive backing for the state, they'll declare to the Christians and to the people who follow the Bible, they'll say, oh, this is the land God gave us. So they use that as a weapon and to intimidate and to tell people that you should support us and you'll be blessed. If you support the children of Israel, you'll be blessed. And people do that and they support it. But then there are people who start questioning what's going on here. What are you doing? It seems that you're killing and you're destroying other people's lives. So the second weapon is called anti-Semitism. So they go and they accuse anybody who opposes them. They dismiss them as anti-Semitic. They don't say that the Palestinians simply were living there for thousands of years and they want their homes, they want their lives. But so they say, oh no, the reasons they don't want us here is because they hate the Jews. how vile, how repugnant this is, because these were the Palestinians, our friends, who we lived together, who brought us in, who gave us homes. We lived together. We babysat each other's children throughout the ages. We lived in the same courtyards. We didn't need any human rights groups to protect us. We were living together, even though we have a distinctly different religion. So how dare they now accuse these good people of being anti-Jewish, and they hate the Jews? It's really unacceptably revolting and just terrible. We can't stomach to hear this. We're so frustrated to hear this. But this is what they accuse them of, and the world buys into this because they started doing this for over 70 years. And there wasn't the smartphones, all the different media outlets that you could get the news. So people had the mainstream media, which was very well under the hands of Zionist supporters. And even today, the major media, you can't get a message across. They don't show our major demonstrations of tens of thousands of people. They don't talk. They ridicule the ones who are of the religious communities who oppose Zionism. How many demonstrations that I was here in New York? We go constantly. By Columbia University, when I went, we just recently, there was the Zionists just now. Everybody knows was following this. They went to one of their synagogues in Manhattan, and they made a gathering to promote moving to Israel. They call Nefesh B'Nefesh. Simply to promote, to take over, to expand the occupation in Palestine. So they made this gathering in a synagogue. So right in the middle of this carnage, this genocide in Gaza, how dare they do such a thing? But they did that. So of course the pro-Palestinian people and a bunch of rabbis and a bunch of our community, a large group of our community, we went outside that synagogue and we demonstrated. And there were police barricades, so nobody could even fathom that anybody could be attacked. There was no arrests because nobody was attacking. We were simply talking. We were holding signs, and we were chanting, that this is evil and so on. What do you think happened? They made this big scandal. Oh, there was an anti-Semitic attack by a synagogue. People came to the synagogue. They wanted to pray. They wanted to serve God. And all these people stood outside and didn't let them, and intimidated and attacked them viciously. It was, they almost were all killed, the people who went into the synagogue. Give me a break. I was there. And anybody who wants to can look at the videos. If they can they'll find the truth. And yet this blatant lie is the modus operandi of Zionism. Constantly vilifying the victims, constantly taking the people of Palestine who are suffering, being murdered, being starved to death. And they ban any reporters. Did you ever hear of such a thing? They ban the reporters. And when there is a reporter, they assassinate them openly. Abu Bakr, they assassinate them. First, they denied that they did it. They say the Palestinians killed them. When they were caught red-handed, they just laugh at it. They killed it. They murdered. They murder medical the staff, the heads of hospitals, the most distinguished doctors. And they still have them in prisons. They're keeping them in prison. It's beyond comprehension. It's so inhumane that there is no excuse and no way to stomach this. And yet the Christian world, to a large degree, is accepting it. Now, again, I don't want to accuse many people simply because they're being conned by the major media outlets that know the truth. Yes. So it's only because you have the alternative media that the truth is getting out. Like you are distinguished media outlet, that you're able to get a podcast, you're able to get it out. But in the normal media, they're not doing it. When the media, the regular media, took me, Associated Press spoke about me. I went to a conference about that the Holocaust should not be used. in Iran that should not be used to oppress the Palestinian people. So they put
Right.
out this Associated Press that Rabbi Weiss said that the Holocaust was exaggerated. Well, my grandparents were killed. The majority of my family were killed in the Holocaust. They fabricated a story out of thin air.
Yes.
And I just, because I threatened them with a lawsuit, they had to make a retraction, which they made a retraction. But this is the media, what's considered all the major media outlets are going in lockstep with Zionism to a degree more, a degree less. They will not refer to the Palestinian people they're suffering as victims almost, and they're very careful how they word it. They don't refer to the Israeli attacks as terrorism or as genocide, or on and on and on. They're very careful. Everything they word, it's just simply to water down the atrocities what the Zionists are doing. But the Christian world, they should use their common sense, because it's an insult to common sense after we're witnessing even these last over 2 years in Gaza. If a person can still buy into the Zionist false, their bogus, their propaganda and their false narrative, it's an insult not only to wisdom, it's an insult to base common sense that God gave every human being. Right. And if anything, I like to say that not only that weapon that they call a nuclear weapon of attack of anti-Semitism is, on the contrary, Zionism and the state of Israel is the textbook definition of anti-Semitism. They are the personification, the word of anti-Semitism, because they've created a rift between Jews and Muslims have been living together for so many hundreds of years in peace. They've driven a rift, they've destroyed that, they've caused rivers of blood of the Palestinians and of Jews who are dying for their cause over there. But not only that, they've also created a hate around the world of Jews what happened to all the Jewish communities in Iraq and in Egypt and all the Arab countries? They disappeared. Why did they disappear? They were living there for hundreds of years. Zionism has destroyed all these communities, and there's a mistrust of the Jews around the world because of what Zionism has created, the portrayal that a Jew is a Zionist. So they are the exacerbation of anti-Semitism. Not that there was never any anti-Semitism before, but they are the greatest exacerbator of anti-Semitism that can possibly be. And to the level that if I go on an airport, I go anywhere, I travel the world, thank God, and I can find people who look at me with hate until they realize that I'm not a Zionist. Sometimes I wear my kufiya, then they they'll smile, but till then they look at us with mistrust and hate. And the Zionists, by the way, as I showed you, they don't dress as Jews almost entirely. You don't even know they're Jewish. So they go run around, traipse around the world, enjoy their freedom around the world, while us Jews, we dress like Jews. We obviously are Jews. We are, God forbid, we shouldn't be in danger because people look at us and say, "Oh, you're the ones who are oppressing the Palestinians." So they do the dirty work. They do the atrocities, and the Jews who are opposed to them suffer because of their doing. So who is anti-Semitic?
Absolutely. So we're kind of getting to the end of our interview time here, and I just kind of want to wrap up this interview with, I'm one of the media creators that is accused of anti-Semitism often, and I just want to go through some of the things that have led me to the conclusions about the state of Israel that I have, and then you as a Jewish rabbi, if you could weigh in on whether these views are anti-Semitic or not. Yes. So I believe that the Zionists have hijacked Jewish identity to produce a state that is anti-God.
Yes.
Would I be wrong in that?
You're 100% right. Both issues, they try to hijack Judaism. God help, they will not be successful, but they are definitely, have done a lot of damage, a terrible amount of damage, because around the world people do consider it a Jewish state. So it's a terrible, terrible catastrophe. But you are right; they are hijacking. It's like you're taking somebody's license, and you put your picture on it. They use the Star of David. They use the name Israel, which is Jacob. The Torah, as I've explained at length, is clearly contradictory. It's forbidden in every facet what they're doing. Their state is forbidden. Even their language, they changed from Lashon Kodesh, the holy language that we pray in the Hebrew, and they made something called Ivrit, modern Hebrew. Everybody who knows that their language is called Ivrit, modern Hebrew. Mm-hmm. If they're making a Jewish state, why did they discard the holy language and make a new language using the Hebrew alphabet? And because they detest God. They made a law system, right? Netanyahu is waiting to be charged as a criminal in their Supreme Court or something. Now, according to Jewish law, two Jews, if they have a controversy, they are not allowed to adjudicate the controversy in outside of the Jewish law. So we have to go to a rabbinate, to rabbis, and according to the Torah, you solve the issue. But they made a Supreme Court that's considered blasphemy in the Torah. So in every because they detest God and they look at their court system, which is based on French and English law, they look at that. They belittle with that the godly Torah, because in other words it's considered blasphemy because you're trying to if you go out of the Jewish law, in other words you're saying that God's Torah, God's wisdom is, God forbid, less. Of course, if a Jew and a non-Jew has a conflict, or you're living in the United States, wherever it may be, and a non-Jew wants to go to a court, you're required to go to a court. But if it's two Jews, they're required. It's considered blasphemy and forbidden to go out of the Jewish system. Yet they made their court system over there. That's blasphemy. So you're 100% right. They try to hijack the religion, and they are against the Jewish people. They are a terrible crime to Judaism, and they're causing the bloodshed and of the Palestinians and the Jews. So what they are is a terrible, like a cancer for Judaism, a tumor for Judaism. And if somebody stands up like you are doing and tries to differentiate and to clarify that Zionism is an evil concept, it's an occupation, while Judaism is a religion, what you're doing is helpful for the Jewish people, and with God's help will help us eventually disassociate the two, so that we can once again live in peace, Jews and Muslims and Arabs and Jews in the world. You understand? So what you're doing is good, but the Zionists, of course, will accuse you of being anti-Semitic. And by the way, I just conceptually, I have to say that we would like to bring a class action suit to all the local governments who are trying to equate Judaism and Zionism, because when they do that and they declare that if the IRA the IRA decision that that it should be that if you speak against Zionism it's anti-Semitic, when they're doing that, they're actually causing harm to our communities, because as I said, the Jewish communities, as you go in the very religious communities, wherever you will go, they're anti-Zionist. But if you could equate the two and you confuse the two, then people will look at us as their enemies. How dare they involve me in this crime of Zionism? So because they're lazy, they're not doing their homework, or because it's convenient for the politicians in order to become popular and get the support. So by using conflating Judaism and Zionism, they are doing a crime against the Jewish people. And we suffered enough. We went through the Holocaust. We are here because we found a home that was the United States that embraced us and gave us and protected us. And we pray for the well-being of the United States, and we are thankful because we were given a free home. And now all of a sudden they're putting on us this black mark of Zionism, as if we are part of this terrible evil, this injustice, what they're doing to the people in Palestine. So what you're doing is good, and you should always, and tell you, the people should look at, whenever anybody attacks you of being anti-Semitic, you should point to say, how come those very religious communities that they pay for their private education, we don't send to public school even though we pay taxes. We have to pay for private education, and we have large families. We're not a permitted family family planning according to Jewish law. You're not allowed to have family planning. So we have large families, and we pay for each individual child their education. It's fortunes, and we pay for kosher food and Jewish dress. You can't just buy it in in some wholesale place. So it costs a fortune. We give our lives for our religion, and you can find that we dress according to the way God rules of us. And yet we're so strict with the Jewish observance. Yet if it would be proper to be pro-Zionist, if it would be something that is correct to be Zionist, this community would be the first community to embrace Zionism, if that would be the will of God. But it is against God. We're not allowed to kill or steal. We're not allowed to have this state. So you can point to these Jewish communities and say, look, the very distinguished rabbis, these God-fearing communities that are just spiritual and kind and do charity and so forth, they are anti-Zionist. So why are you accusing me of being anti-Semitic? Say I'm following the edicts and the ways of the Jewish communities that are living the Jewish life. So point to them and be careful. Don't call it a Jewish state. Be careful not to fall into the trap of the Zionists that they want you to refer to it as a Jewish state, so it should have the failings or it should sound like you're anti-Semitic. You have to be careful to call it the Zionist state, the state of Israel, but don't, it's not the Jews or the Jewish state, because then you are it gives it an aura effect of being like anti-Semitic, and it's not Jewish. It's a total
secular
rebellion against Judaism.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on today. It's been a pleasure to have you on to talk about these issues and clarify it from a Jewish perspective.
Yeah, so we pray to God, and I wish you can get the word to the people in Gaza and Palestine that we're crying, and we urge everybody that ultimately it's the Almighty who's the power of the world, and He will, with His compassion, He can and He will bring an end. As I said in the Torah, it says, why are you rebelling against me? It will not be successful. The state will end. We urge everybody to pray for the God with His compassion, the Almighty, all compassionate, to bring a speedy and peaceful dismantlement, entirely the removal of the impediment to peace, the Zionist state of Israel. At the same time, don't be intimidated. Do what you can. Speak up for the people of Gaza. Speak up for the people of Palestine. Try to spread the word. We go to universities. We go all over. I just came back from Phoenix, from Arizona. We go all over. We speak, and we're ready to speak all over, to educate, to be able to give the people the fortitude, the courage to speak up for the people of Palestine and for the Jewish people, that we should be free of this impediment to peace, the Zionist state of Israel. And let me add just one little point. You find that apartheid was existing for many years in South Africa, for tens of years, and the United Nations officially recognized and gave credence to South Africa, even though they were practicing this discrimination, this blatant racism, and it was accepted. And the ones who opposed them were arrested. They were called terrorists. Yes, Nelson Mandela was sitting in prison for 27 years. So and yet they were the South Africa was given the total respect in the United Nations. They were not thrown out. And what happened if there was the grassroots, people like you, and people spoke and made the politicians uncomfortable, till finally they stopped supporting it. But it was the grassroots. So eventually they stopped apartheid. Today, if you will try to implement an apartheid government somewheres, you will be laughed out of the United Nations. It would never be accepted, right? That's simple. That's basic. How come for so many years they accepted it? So you can see that a world body could accept a total evil and support it and even oppress the ones who are opposed to it and arrest them. The same thing is with the state of Israel. It's been recognized by the United Nations, and they created it, actually. They ratified it, even though by ratifying a state of Israel, the majority of the people that were living there were the Muslims, and then there was, as I mentioned, the Christians and the Jews also didn't want it. And by creating a state of Israel, which the United Nations was created to adjudicate world conflict through peaceful means. And they were one of the first things they did in 1948. It was right after the creation of the state of the United Nations, and they created a state of Israel, which was going to cause automatically conflict, because if you call it Israel, Jewish state, so what happens is that the other people who are living there automatically, psychologically, are second-class citizens. How could they do such a thing? And then, it culminated. So you see, it's a satanic thing, and it culminated in that we're witnessing this over 3 years of the 3 years of the murder in Gaza, the carnage, the unbelievable what we live. So this is satanic. And if a person who believes in God knows that God gives the power of this, so we have to pray to God and do not be intimidated, or because the world bodies or your local governments are supporting the state of Israel. They could and they are making a mistake and supporting a terrible evil. So speak up, spread our word. We'll help you. We'll go spread our word, please, to the people of Palestine, and call us to your communities. And we don't charge for our speaking. We'll help teach you and bring you the courage and the support to stand up for godliness, what's right, and for a free Palestine. God should help you to witness a free Palestine sooner nowadays.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi Weiss.
Thank you.